On one side, we got lawyers like this saying this prosecution against P. Diddy Combs is racist because they have 5 white women trying to put him in jail.
Because what you're talking about now is an allegation that this, and I'm going to use its Mandingo stereotype of this crazed black man who's being prosecuted by 5 white women.
Then on the other side, you got people saying that Diddy is obviously going to be convicted. Here's one of the top criminal lawyers in the country.
If this is going to play out the way I think it is, the government has a slam dunk case, I think.
All right, 2 weeks of the Diddy trial are in the books, and this is the week 2 review of the Diddy trial. Let's talk about it.
Planet, I am Andy Signor. So glad to have Nate the lawyer back. How you doing, Nate?
I'm doing all right. I feel like my headset is like gobbling my head, but yeah,
it's like
I'm
there's a
doing
green
fine,
screen.
man.
It's like there's a green screen behind you. But now that we've had a little bit more leeway, they're gone for the weekend, long weekend, and we're now have more under our belt to see these RICO charges, including Kid Cudi's arson charges. I mean, this sure is arson. I wanted to go through this chart. Now, he did a great video. You can go see it over at Nate the Lawyer, learn more about it, along with a bunch of other great content over there. So go support and watch it in depth. But now with some new insight coming in, I wanted you to help explain this again, because you said it in my mind pretty well, and I've been more confident. Oh, he's cooked. Yeah. The RICO charges he's being charged with, they only have to prove 2 out of 8.
Now, before we get into the details, let's just do a quick overview on what Diddy is actually being charged with. Okay, so here are the charges. Count 1 is racketeering conspiracy, 18 U.S.C. section 1962. Count 3 and 5 are transportation to engage in prostitutions in violation of 18 U.S.C. sections 24, 21, and counts 2 and 4 are sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion. That's in violation of 18 U.S.C. section 1591. Now, I know I've spoken about 5 crimes, but when you look at the indictment, you'll notice that there are a lot more than 5 crimes. For instance, here in section 13, they're listed a whole bunch of crimes, like kidnapping, arson, even bribery is listed under here. So you may be asking, well, why isn't Diddy being charged separately for those crimes? That's because those crimes are being charged under the RICO statute. So what I did was take all of Diddy's alleged crimes and put it into this handy chart. So as you see in the indictment, number 13A is kidnapping and 13B is arson. Here in the chart, 13A, kidnapping, and 13B, arson, along with all the other crimes that the government's alleging that Diddy committed in his RICO indictment. Now, I want to point you to 13F and 13G. 13F is sex trafficking and 13G is transportation for prostitution. Now, why these are important, because Diddy is being charged separately from RICO for these 2 charges. And as you can see, both of these counts he's being charged twice with. So he's got 2 counts of sex trafficking and 2 counts of transportation for prostitution outside of the other RICO crimes. Now, the government, to get a conviction for RICO, will only have to prove Diddy committed 2 of these crimes in furtherance of the criminal organization. And it says that on line 14 of the indictment. The defendant agreed that a conspirator would commit at least 2 acts of racketeering activity in the conduct of the affairs of the Comb enterprise. So this chart encompasses all of the charges that Diddy's being accused of, and we're going to use that as a reference.
I got other questions, legal questions you're going to have hopefully answer for me, but let's start here. Why are you so confident? When we look at this chart, which if you are looking at it, chat, he's already done a lot of this. We've already sort of seen that this is all stuff the feds are gone. They're on top of it pretty easily. But can you explain this again, sort of to the dummies out there like myself, so we understand what we're looking at?
Sure. So Diddy is being charged with, he has 5 actual counts. So one of them is the RICO count that we've all been talking about. And there are 4 other counts. 2 of the counts are for prostitution, transporting prostitutes across state lines, and the other 2 are for sex trafficking. So technically, they're really 3 charges, but 5 separate counts. Now, when we talk about RICO, the government has alleged that Diddy has committed something like 23 different crimes. Now, for RICO, you have those crimes are put in categories. For instance, like the crime of arson. Arson, and when you see, well, let's start with the top one, kidnapping. On the chart, you'll see kidnapping plus what's that second word? Variations. So that's like attempted kidnapping, aiding and abetting kidnapping, or conspiracy to kidnap. So those like 4 charges are within that. So if he's found guilty of any one of those charges, that would be one of the charges for the RICO predicate of kidnapping. The same thing where you see 13B arson. It's arson plus attempt, conspiracy, whatever. So if he's found guilty of even attempted arson, or if he didn't do it, then he could be found. So it's 23 crimes grouped into these 8 different categories. Now, for the government to prove RICO, they got to prove the enterprise, which I'm assuming they're doing. They have to prove the knowledge of the criminal scheme. They don't have to prove the knowledge of that he knew the actual crime, but just of the criminal nature of the enterprise. And then they have to prove those 2 RICO, the underlying RICO predicates to have a conviction for RICO. Now, I want to be very clear. I'm not sure if Diddy's going to get convicted or not, but there are a lot of legal commentators online that are saying, they're not proving, there's no charges being proven, or they'll say something like, I don't see any crimes, all this stuff that's happening isn't really criminal, they're just having parties and weird sex.
Because what you're talking about now is an allegation that this, and I'm going to use its Mandingo stereotype of this crazed black man who's being prosecuted by 5 white women who are saying this man's sexual needs are insatiable and they can have sex for hours and hours and never rest and always ejaculate. That's not true from a pharmacological standpoint. That is absurd. If this was in the 60s or 70s in Mississippi, I think people would be irate.
And I want to first debunk that. So, number one, if you're here in the United States, I don't know if you're in Amsterdam somewhere, it may be different, but if you're in the United States, having drug-fueled sex parties with porn stars and prostitutes or sex workers.
Workers, let's call them workers.
Yes, we'll call them workers. That is illegal here in the United States. No?
Yep.
That's illegal here in the United States. So, do we have any evidence on the Diddy trial that he had sex workers that he paid to cross state lines through his company to engage in commercial sex acts? In other words, where they're getting paid to have sex. And I think 13G is satisfied, right? We've had multiple sex workers come on and say, he flew me from New York to Miami across state lines for the purpose to engage in this freak off. So
and
to me,
they're
that
always
seems like it's a
carrying their Gucci bag worth of, we're going to call them substances, Nate. That's 13H.
I haven't even gotten to the substances yet. We got to the substances. We had 2 federal agents. One did a raid here, one did a raid here. They found these illegal substances. They got his drug mule and his assistant. Right? Yep. They were talking about the same stuff too.
Phil Pines was Diddy's senior executive assistant from 2019 to 2021. He says his then boss asked him to purchase supplies for parties dubbed Wild King Nights.
We usually had a laundry list of items that included lights, alcohol, marijuana, ketamine, Molly. Those requests started to become more frequent.
So if you just look at the list, you see 13G and I think 13H are pretty much gimmies. Everybody who's testified in this case has testified to the extracurricular stuff that was there in terms of drugs. And this, matter of fact, Cassie testified to it. So I think those 2 are pretty much solid. Now, understand with RICO, we only need 2 of these to be, the jury to find 2 of these to be true. And that could be a life sentence. So with that being said, even if you don't believe the trafficking allegations from Cassie, which is 13F, they have another victim who's going to make the same claims as 13F. Then guess what's going to happen? That's another RICO predicate that they can find. Forced labor. There's another one, witness tampering. And we've heard a lot of evidence to these effects. For instance, the witness tampering. That's essentially, remember the security guard where he said Diddy handed him a whole stack of cash and told him to be quiet? Well, that's bribery and that's witness tampering.
That's 2
so
of them, right?
For one. You get 2 for 1 if the jury believes that happened. What about the other witnesses that were threatened, like Dawn? She said they brought him into a room and said, hey, don't tell anybody about this or else. And she said, I thought my life was being threatened, right? Well, that may not be bribery, but that sure does sound like witness tampering to me. So in all of these, so when I try to explain to people that Diddy has a real issue here, because it's great that people are focusing on Cassie and the naughty stuff, But at the end of the day, this could be just categorized as a drug distribution and transportation for a prostitution case. And if you just use those two, I don't know how he doesn't go to. I don't know how you don't get RICO. You know, maybe you have something else that you can explain to me about the RICO, but maybe you don't have RICO. But I think you got those two for sure, and you only need two.
As we've been saying on my show, all I hear is RICO law is without a doubt is what's happening here. It's become our catchphrase because every time we're going through the updates, I'm like, RICO law. It's over and over again now. We've been singing it every day. I have two questions before we wrap it up because I have two other legal questions. And bravo, well said. It's like, guys, I don't know what else I saw Suge Knight's attorney or whatever was out there on Piers Morgan like, no, it's just a black man being held down. It's false. And I'm like, can we talk about the real issues here? Yeah, because it's not about race. This is about this. And you can't tell me he didn't do some of these things. And that's really what this is all about. Plus all the stuff in the video, the dude's toast. But one thing about the RICO, people are telling me, oh no, but Andy, it's not true because you have to have multiple defendants. In order for organized crime, whatever RICO charges, is that true? And that brings up the question of why aren't we seeing other people? There's this Christina Karam character who's getting mentioned a lot as someone who's responsible for payments and seems like would be part of this criminal enterprise. We haven't heard if she's going to be a witness. Is she turning? How does that work in this? And can she be another defendant but then get a deal and not actually be on the stand? Can you explain some of that?
That's an excellent question. And when I was at the prosecutor's office, we had something called unindicted co-conspirators. And you know that's another word for snitch. When you snitch, you are an unindicted co-conspirator, and the person who we want to try is the person who's on trial there. And you go testify, and you know what you're testifying to all the crimes you guys to conspire to do to whoever. Want me to tell you who I believe is an unindicted co-conspirator? I think Cassie is. Cassie talks about remember there was the thing, I paid him, we did this, I paid for I did this, I did that. That's an unindicted Diddy's assistant, the one who was buying the substances and all that stuff and setting everything up. Guess what he is? He got an immunity deal because he is what's known as an unindicted co-conspirator.
Now to the Sean Diddy Combs sex trafficking trial. A former employee of the music mogul was granted immunity today. Without it, George Kaplan signaled his intention to invoke his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Now that he's got immunity, Kaplan is expected soon to take the witness stand.
So those all count. These are other co-conspirators.
These are all co-conspirators who've been unindicted, who have not been indicted by the government.
When does that get announced? Like, when are they going to make that clear?
They generally make that clear in the charging documents, but it's clear from the testimony because you have people up there testifying, I committed crime. Like think about the sex workers. They're admitting to sex work on the stand, right? That's not legal.
Right.
And all these people who have worked with Diddy are working within the conspiracy under the thing. So that's what you have here. This is a conspiracy because a conspiracy is all these people are working together for some common purpose or for some common good. But now not everybody in the conspiracy has to even know what everyone else is doing. That's why it's called conspiracy. And that's why conspiracy is really can be really tough on defendants. Because let's say if I'm the boss of the mob, but some random person kills someone on behalf of our mob business and I don't know about it, I can still be held under the conspiracy because it benefits the goals of the company or the enterprise. So I just want to make it very clear. Diddy is the head of the corporation, but a lot of the people who we're going to see at trial are what's known as unindicted co-conspirators. And you see that all the time in law.
That's huge. So therefore, that anybody who's saying that that's not true, yeah, there were other conspirators. We're just not indicting them.
Exactly.
Diddy's clearly the ringmaster. We're just going after him, just like they'd go after the mob boss. They're not going after everybody else. They're using his players to nail the mob boss and so on.
Yeah.
So
and they give them deals.
All right.
One other thing I definitely want to mention, even with all this, one thing that you'll hear a lot is this is a DV case. You'll hear this is a DV case.
He's not a good person. He's a bad woman beater and he's a coward. I know the guy. Everybody I know agrees with that. But this is not a case about domestic violence. And
it's crazy because the same people who'll say, I don't see any crimes, they're not the other side of their mouth. They'll say it's a DV case. Well, domestic violence is a crime. You know what I'm saying? So you can't have one end of say, I don't see any crimes and say this is a DV case. And the reason why, obviously, domestic violence, because Diddy's essentially, his lawyers copped to it in the opening statements, and it's clear because it's on video. But I want to make it very clear when it comes to domestic violence and trafficking, for instance, when you have situations in which you have a boyfriend trafficking his girlfriend, because a lot of times you'll have young women who you'll have like a Rico Suave type character who will be able to coax women into sex trafficking or even human trafficking. And that woman will say, that's my boyfriend. And the way they control their victims is through domestic violence. They'll, do those type of things. And so a lot of sex trafficking cases involve domestic violence. Domestic violence is the means of coercion, is the means of control, is the force that's being used to keep these people under control. So when someone says this is a domestic violence case, both can be true. It can be a domestic violence case, but domestic violence is being used as a means for sex trafficking. And that's what the government's saying here. Just because they were in a relationship, and that's why, and I'll tell people, just look at the law. Just because the law and the law, it makes it very clear that even if you're in this type of physical relationship doesn't exempt you from sex trafficking charges, because unfortunately, in a lot of sex trafficking cases, the person is sex trafficked by either their boyfriend or somebody who they know.
So this image is probably fair how Diddy should be feeling in reality, even though he's yucking it up and there's rumors that he's positive in there. The jury's positive. You're feeling confident Diddy's going away.
Well, my confidence level is extremely high on what the government is trying to prove and what they've put out. And again, I haven't been there for the cross-examination because you don't know how the jury is binding this credibility. But the way generally prosecutors overcome credibility issues with witnesses is by loading up a lot of witnesses who are saying the same thing. So, for instance, you have Cassie. She gives the first narrative. This is what happened to me. Then you have the security guard give the second narrative. This is what happened. And you have this person. And then as you can hear, everybody's kind of saying the same thing, but just in different instances. She was beaten this time. She was done this. This was happened to her. This was happening to her. And what happens is that even if you don't believe Cassie, you can still say, well, but what about the video? What about her friend that testified? What about her mom? What about Diddy's bandmate who testified that this happened? So you have all this corroborating evidence, and it makes it harder for it to be a credibility contest between Cassie and Diddy. So that's why, and it's funny because there's another lawyer who's literally doing a RICO trial now, and me and him were arguing. I don't know how Diddy doesn't avoid getting on the stand, because right now the narrative here is really, unless some of these other witnesses, they can come up and kill their credibility. Right now, I just don't see it, because when your case relies on witnesses, it's obviously going to be tough with the credibility. But some of these charges aren't witness-based charges. They are literally, were there drugs in the house? Were there drugs at the party? Everybody's saying yes. Even I think Diddy would have to say yes, right? There's photographs and videos of the drugs and all that stuff. Boom, you got that. And then the transportation for the sex workers. Well, guess what? There's invoices. Is this. Payments were made electronically, right? They're not going to the airport and paying cash. So guess what? When it comes to that seems to be so some of these charges are just paper charges that I just don't think you can get out of. So yeah, so when it comes to the credibility issues of some of the witnesses, I think you can make an argument there. But for some of the cases where it's just a paper issue, like here's the invoices or here are the videos, then I think he's done. I think he's done. So right now, if I'm a betting man, I'm calling it like 80 to 20. 80% for conviction for 20. But I want to be very clear. That number can change based on whatever defense they put up, because they can put up a hell of a defense. I just don't know what they're going to do.
Well, still reason to be stressed. Clearly, he's got to be stressing this out. So I can't blame him there. Make sure you follow Nate the Lawyer over on YouTube and on X for more commentary. Always love having you, my man. Please come back. Keep coming back. Make sure you hit subscribe to his channel and our channel as well. Hit that button and then hit the bell.